Hi. I'm Adelise Monroe. And my husband's family threw a wedding, without me. They used my money, my ideas, even my signature. Then burned our wedding album like I never existed. But let me start from the beginning. Because this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when the woman they erased picks up every broken piece and builds fireproof proof. Let me show you what silence sounds like when it stops being polite. The afternoon light slid across the floor like it was trying to escape the room. Scottsdale heat shimmered outside the windows, yet the air inside felt strangely cold. I sat on the couch, the same spot where Callum and I once planned weekend trips that never happened, when my phone buzzed. A message from an old coworker blinked on the screen. Congrats to Valora, stunning wedding. For a second, my brain refused to make sense of it. I tapped the notification, expecting a mistake, maybe a commercial shoot or charity event. Instead, Instagram flooded open, velvet ribbons, white roses, and my husband's face smiling beside his sister. My thumb hovered as I scrolled through frame after frame, Valora in a lace gown, their mother adjusting her veil, Callum holding champagne. The caption read, "So blessed to be surrounded by family." Family. The word burned. My reflection ghosted on the phone screen between the perfect images. I wasn't there. Not even a mention, not even a shadow. My breath thinned as if the room had lost its oxygen. For a moment, I thought maybe the wedding was months old, some flashback post, but the comments were fresh. Yesterday was magical. Couldn't be happier for the Danes family. I whispered to no one, yesterday? My voice cracked against the quiet walls. I hadn't been forgotten. I'd been edited out. The silence swelled until I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I stared at the photos again, searching for any trace, maybe a chair where I once sat, a reflection caught in glass. Nothing. I closed the app, but the images burned behind my eyelids like aftershocks. 2 days ago. Just 2 days. Callum had kissed my forehead that morning, gentle and practiced, before grabbing his keys. I'll be at Mom's, she needs help sorting storage boxes. Might be gone most of the day. Nothing in his tone, nothing in the way he smiled suggested he was driving to a church. I remembered handing him a bottle of water, telling him not to overwork his back. I remembered the faint cologne he wore, something new Valora had bought him for Christmas. And now, looking at those photos, I saw the same scent trailing down the aisle. Was I blind? Or was I never meant to see? Twilight bled through the blinds, painting lines across the floor like bars. I sat there until the air went gray and still, until I couldn't tell if the sound in my chest was breathing or breaking. My phone buzzed again. I didn't move. When I finally stood, my legs felt like someone else's. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. The normal smell of evenings that should have been ordinary. But nothing was ordinary anymore. At 8:47, headlights swept across the living room. Callum's car. I waited by the counter, mug in hand, pretending to read an email. The door clicked open, keys clattered on the hook. He hummed, actually hummed, like a man walking into peace. "How was your mom?" I asked quietly. He looked up, startled for just a second, then smiled that careful smile I'd learned to distrust. "Oh, fine. We sorted through a ton of junk. Long day." I studied him. His shirt was pressed, his shoes spotless. "You helped with boxes wearing that?" He blinked. "Huh? You're dressed for a photo shoot, not storage." A pause stretched between us. The hum of the refrigerator filled it. "There was a wedding," I said. My own voice surprised me, calm, flat, the sound of glass cracking under weight. He froze mid-step, color draining slightly from his face. What? "Valora's wedding," I said. "I saw it. The photos. Everyone was there." His shoulders slumped an inch, just enough to confess everything. Then he tried to recover. "It was just family, Adelise. She wanted something intimate. You wouldn't have been comfortable, all those people, the noise." "The noise of your family?" He rubbed his temple. "You're reading too much into this." "No," I set the mug down gently so it wouldn't break. "You just defined family without me." He sighed, that exasperated tone that always meant conversation over. "Please don't make this a thing." Mom thought. "Stop." My throat closed around the word. "Don't make this about your mother's thoughts." The silence stretched so long the clock seemed louder than our breathing. Finally, he muttered, "I didn't want drama." I almost laughed. "You succeeded." His eyes darted to the floor. Valora didn't mean anything by it. She never has to. You both let her actions speak for her. He started to walk past me, reaching for the stairs. I caught his sleeve, not roughly, just enough to make him look back. Tell me the truth, I said softly. Was I ever going to be invited? He hesitated, then whispered, probably not. The words landed like pebbles but sank like stones. I let go of his arm. The fabric slipped from my fingers. He walked upstairs without turning around. The sound of each step folded into the quiet until it was gone. I stayed in the kitchen. The air smelled faintly of coffee turning bitter. My hands shook slightly as I poured the cold liquid down the sink. Every motion felt rehearsed, like I was following someone else's routine. After a while, I went into the guest room, the one I'd painted soft blue for Valora when she visited. The air still carried her perfume, floral and artificial. On the dresser stood a framed photo, the three of us at a picnic, laughing at something long forgotten. I picked it up carefully. The glass was cool against my palms. In the photo, Callum leaned toward his sister, and I sat just outside the curve of their shoulders, close enough to fit but not enough to belong. I traced the outline of my own face with my thumb. For a moment, I wondered what would happen if I threw it, if I let it shatter. But I didn't. I set it face down in the drawer instead. Quietly. Slowly. Gently. When I closed the drawer, the sound was final. I stood in front of the mirror. The reflection caught only half my face, the other half swallowed by shadow. It felt honest, in a way photographs never were. I breathed once, twice, the air thick with silence. My voice barely above a whisper, not forgotten. Just never written in. The house hummed, pretending nothing had changed. Upstairs, the water in the shower began to run. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of everything unspoken pressing against my ribs. Outside, night spread over the desert like ink. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, its cry both lonely and free. I didn't cry back. I just listened, letting the sound fill the hollow places where family used to live. Quietly, slowly, gently, I began to understand the truth. The wedding didn't miss me by accident. It was built to exclude me, frame by frame, until I disappeared. I turned off the lamp, leaving only the thin stripe of moonlight across the floor. For the first time that day, I felt something that wasn't anger. It was clarity, cold and clean. I walked to my desk, opened the laptop, and looked at the frozen image of that caption again, so blessed to be surrounded by family. I whispered to the screen, I hope the blessing lasts. Then I closed it, softly, as if putting a lid on grief. In the silence that followed, I heard my heartbeat even out, slow, steady, almost calm. I placed the picture face down, but the real picture, the one they'd painted without me, had already gone viral. The next morning arrived like a punishment. The desert sun cut through the blinds, thin and harsh, turning the dust into tiny shards of gold. I hadn't slept. The living room still smelled of stale coffee and regret. A sound broke the silence, a single ping from my phone. For a moment, I thought it was work. Something normal. Something safe. But the preview on the screen froze my breath. Just saw this. Is it true you weren't invited? The message was from Marcy, a coworker from my old writing job. She'd attached a picture. I opened it, and the world seemed to tilt. It was a seating chart. Valora's wedding. Printed names arranged neatly in gold script. My name, Adelise Danes, was there. But someone had drawn a thick red line straight through it. Below, in smaller text, do not seat. No longer attending. I stared at the image until the words blurred. I hadn't said I couldn't come. Someone said it for me. The edges of the phone pressed into my palm as if trying to anchor me. I tried to breathe evenly, but every inhale scraped like glass. Marcy sent another text. I thought maybe you had travel plans? Everyone said you couldn't make it. I didn't answer. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then fell away. There was no way to explain what it felt like to see your own erasure printed and laminated. For a moment, the room felt too small. I opened the window, but even the wind felt staged, like everything around me was pretending to be ordinary. Weeks before the wedding, Valora had called one night. I'd been editing a medical report, half listening, half grateful for her sudden friendliness. She'd asked, almost casually, if I was planning any trip soon. You've been working non-stop, she'd said. Maybe you should take a break. At the time, I thought it was kindness. Now, I could hear the map forming in her mind. She wasn't checking in. She was making sure I'd be somewhere else when the cameras flashed. I closed my eyes and saw her perfect smile, that same tilt of the head she used when she was about to say something cruel disguised as charm. The phone buzzed again. Another message. Not from Marcy this time, an old notification from my shared cloud account. New shared media available. I hesitated before opening it. Most of my photos were synced between devices, half private, half forgotten. But curiosity, or maybe pain, won. Inside the shared folder sat a single voice memo. It was labeled, Family Rehearsal. The timestamp was from 2 months ago. I didn't remember recording it, but the moment I pressed play, my heart stumbled. Valora's voice filled the air, bright, polished, rehearsed. I told her we might postpone. Let's just not tell her it's back on. Honestly, it's better if she thinks she's the one stepping back. It'll look cleaner that way. A pause. Then my mother-in-law, Isolde, her tone low and deliberate. It's not malicious, darling. Optics matter. Family photos are forever. The recording clicked softly as if someone moved closer to the microphone. Valora laughed. She doesn't really belong at things like this anyway. The sound of my own heartbeat drowned everything else. The phone slipped from my hand, hit the rug, and kept playing, tiny voices leaking into the quiet. For a long time, I couldn't move. My body went cold, yet my face burned. I sat there listening to the echo of my name turned into an inconvenience. When the recording ended, the room felt hollow. I reached for the phone, stared at the black screen, and whispered, so this was never an accident. I saved the file under a new folder, Truth. All day, I carried that sound inside me. Each word repeated like a drip from a faucet I couldn't shut off. By the time the sun slipped low again, I felt the exhaustion of someone who'd spent the day holding a scream behind her teeth. When Callum came home, the air in the house shifted. I could tell from the way he paused at the door that he sensed something. He hung up his keys, his eyes flicking toward me like a man scanning for danger. Did you know? My voice was even, careful. Did you know they said I shouldn't be there because of optics? He frowned, as if the word itself confused him. What are you talking about? The wedding. The conversation. I heard it. His shoulders stiffened. You went through my stuff? No, I said quietly. Through mine. It was in our shared account. He exhaled, slow, like someone buying time. Mom said she said it might be better for photos. You don't always mesh with everyone. Mesh? The word cracked in my mouth. Is that what we're calling honesty now? He rubbed the back of his neck. It's not personal. It's completely personal. His eyes darted to the floor. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. I laughed, softly, bitterly. It was big enough to plan around me. Big enough to cross my name out. He sighed. You always think people are against you. And you always think pretending keeps the peace. He stepped forward. Please, Adelise. Don't start this tonight. Start what? I asked. Telling the truth? He looked at me with the weariness of someone who'd already decided not to understand. You're tired. We both are. Let's just drop it. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, the pulse of every word I wanted to say but couldn't. Finally, I whispered, you didn't defend me. He didn't answer. The silence between us was an admission. That night, I sat at my desk long after he went to bed. The glow of the computer screen painted my hands pale blue. I opened the shared cloud folder again, scrolled through years of photos, birthdays, vacations, random dinners. In every picture, I was there, smiling beside them. It looked like happiness. One by one, I deleted them. The beach trip where Valora borrowed my sunglasses. Gone. The Thanksgiving where I cooked alone while they laughed in the yard. Gone. The Christmas morning where Callum called me the glue of this family. Gone. Each delete clicked like a heartbeat. When I finished, the folder was empty. My cursor hovered over the final confirmation. Are you sure you want to remove these files? I pressed yes. Then I opened Instagram, scrolled through my own feed, smiling faces, polite captions, the illusion of belonging, and hit deactivate account. No announcement. No passive-aggressive goodbye. Just silence. As the screen faded to black, I felt something unclench in my chest. Not peace exactly. More like the quiet after an alarm stops ringing. Upstairs, Callum's faint snore reached the hallway. I wondered if he ever thought about what it meant to erase someone while sleeping beside them. I walked to the window and looked out at the desert horizon, still glowing under the moonlight. The city hummed beyond the hills, indifferent and alive. They wanted optics. Fine. Let me disappear, perfectly. Morning came quiet, too quiet, like the house was holding its breath. The desert light crept across the floorboards, sharp and honest, exposing the smallest pieces of dust that yesterday's arguments had left behind. I hadn't dreamed, hadn't even blinked properly. Sleep didn't want to share a room with me anymore. My laptop sat on the kitchen counter where I'd left it the night before. I wasn't planning to open it, at least that's what I told myself while my hands moved on their own. The machine came alive, humming softly, like it knew what I was about to find. I opened the joint bank account Callum and I had used since we married. Rows of numbers filled the screen. Names of companies I didn't recognize. Event company. Deposit. Venue rental. Floral consulting. Catering service. All within 1 month of the wedding. I scrolled down slowly, each line slicing deeper. $20,450 withdrawn. All approved by him. No mention, no discussion. My throat tightened. They hadn't just excluded me, they'd made me pay for the privilege. I whispered to the quiet kitchen, they spent my silence. The sound broke before it reached the air. I clicked on one of the charges and saw the location tag, Paradise Valley Resort. I remembered showing Valora that place when we were browsing venues for our own wedding. She'd said it was too upscale for our taste. I almost laughed. The irony sat bitter on my tongue. A memory tugged at me, uninvited. 3 years ago, a Sunday afternoon. I was sitting on the floor surrounded by color palettes and ribbons. Valora had stopped by unannounced, watching me paint watercolor florals for our future invitations. "You're so good at the little touches," she'd said, smiling like a child admiring something she planned to steal. "You make everything look effortless." At the time, I took it as a compliment. Now, scrolling through her hashtag, Valora Dane's wedding, I saw my effort everywhere. Her centerpieces were the same ones I designed, down to the pale sage ribbon tied around each vase. My calligraphy appeared on the menus, the same curving letters I'd practiced until my fingers cramped. Even the layout of the invitation mirrored my old drafts. They didn't just take my place at the table. They took my work, my taste, my fingerprints, and wore them like jewelry. The photos glittered with approval. Guests posing under the floral arch I'd once dreamed of standing beneath. Valora tagged everyone except me. A comment from a soul read, "So proud of you, sweetheart. You've made this family shine again." Again. The word hit me like a confession. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. Then I closed the laptop softly, like shutting a casket. By evening, the air in the house felt too thick to breathe. The coffee machine hissed as Callum brewed a fresh pot, humming some half-forgotten tune. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him measure sugar. "Did you use our money for Valora's wedding?" The question left my mouth without warning. He froze. The spoon clinked against the counter. "What?" "Our account." I checked the statements. He shifted his weight, the easy calm of a man preparing his excuse. "It was for the family," he said. "She needed it." "And you didn't think I needed to know?" He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You weren't using it. It's not like it's gone forever. We'll recover." Something inside me broke, not loudly, not visibly, but like a hairline crack in porcelain that would never mend right. "It wasn't your money to move," I said softly. He met my eyes, annoyance flickering behind guilt. "You're being dramatic, Adelise." "Dramatic?" I laughed quietly, the sound sharp and empty. "You let them spend my earnings to fund the wedding I wasn't invited to." He shook his head. "You always twist things." "No," I whispered, "I just stopped pretending they're straight." The silence between us thickened. He poured his coffee as if the conversation was over. "You're overreacting," he said finally. "Mom's been through enough. Valora deserved a good start. Then maybe she should have married you." The words came before I could stop them. His face hardened. "That's out of line. So is stealing." He stared at me, eyes flat. "You're turning into someone I don't recognize." I wanted to tell him that's because the woman he recognized had been rewritten, repurposed, replaced. But I said nothing. When he left the room, the smell of burnt coffee lingered. I stood there listening to the quiet tick of the clock, realizing how long I'd measured my worth in their approval. Quietly, slowly, gently, I understood that silence was no longer survival. It was consent. Later that night, I opened my laptop again. I transferred my portion of the savings to a new account under my maiden name. Each click felt like cutting a cord. I changed every password, one by one. Cancelled the shared cloud subscription. Deleted the automatic bill payments that linked to his card. If they could use my money without permission, I'd make sure they'd never touch another dime. The house hummed in the background, the sound of the refrigerator mixing with the dull thud of my heartbeat. I moved quietly, deliberately, as if any sudden sound might break the fragile shell of resolve forming around me. When I finished, I closed the laptop and looked around the kitchen. Everything looked the same, cups stacked, mail piled near the sink, but something had shifted. The house no longer felt shared. It felt borrowed. I walked to my small studio room, where I kept my art supplies. The soft scent of paint and paper still lived there. On the desk, a stack of my old design prints waited, ideas for wedding menus, floral sketches, invitation layouts. I flipped through them until I found the one I remembered best, ivory background, olive branches circling the text. I set it beside a photo from Valora's wedding that someone had posted online. Identical. Except for the name. I stared at both for a long time, my fingers trembling not from anger but recognition. They'd used my work, my time, and called it theirs. Quietly, I lit a candle. The small flame wavered, catching the corner of Valora's printed menu. The edge curled, blackened, then turned to ash. I watched it burn until the paper folded in on itself, soft and weightless. The scent of smoke filled the air, faint, almost sweet. It didn't smell like loss. It smelled like closure. I opened the window, letting the night air in. The stars looked indifferent, scattered over the desert like pieces of glass. Let them keep the celebration. Let them toast their stolen joy. I would take back every cost, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of me they could claim. Slowly, gently, I exhaled and whispered to the dark, "You can't erase what built you." Then I turned off the light, the glow of the candle fading to a quiet ember. The candle's smoke lingered through the night, faint but stubborn, wrapping the room in a quiet haze. By morning, it had turned into something sharper, an ache behind my eyes that no amount of coffee could rinse away. The day started like any other, but I could feel something waiting for me beyond the door. When I opened it, there it was, a box sitting on the porch. Brown, taped unevenly, the return label printed in neat black letters, Dane's residence. For a second, I thought it was another package of household junk Callum ordered and forgot to mention. Then I noticed the handwriting scrawled in blue ink across the top. "She said you might want this since you weren't there to see it." Isolde. My chest tightened. I bent down, the desert heat pressing against my neck, and dragged the box inside. The cardboard was lighter than I expected, hollow in a way that made me uneasy. I slit the tape open, the sound slicing through the silence. Inside, layers of white fabric gleamed in the morning light, Valora's wedding gown. Wrinkled, folded carelessly, stuffed inside like laundry. No note, no explanation. Just that yellow sticky square stuck to the bodice like an insult. I stared at it for a long time. The lace shimmered faintly, the same lace she'd gushed over months ago when she asked me for recommendations. "You always have such good taste," she'd said, tracing the screen of my Pinterest board. "If I ever get married again, I'm stealing your style." And she had. Every inch of it. Now, the proof sat in my living room like a corpse dressed for display. They mailed me shame. Packaged, labeled, delivered. I ran my fingers across the gown, the silk cold and foreign. It wasn't mine, but somehow it carried the scent of everything they'd taken. The faint perfume of their triumph clung to it. I folded the top closed again, gently, as though I could suffocate the memory back into silence. The phone rang around noon. I almost didn't answer, but habit won. It was Jenna from my old job. "Adelise, turn on channel 8, she said, breathless. My stomach sank. "Why?" "Just do it." I turned on the TV, the volume low. Valora's face filled the screen, bright, smiling, radiant under the studio lights. She was sitting on a couch next to a local host, talking about her perfect wedding and how blessed she was to have such a supportive family. I stood still. My throat felt dry. The host laughed, leaning forward. "Your photos were stunning. Who helped you plan it all?" Valora smiled modestly, tilting her head like she'd rehearsed it. "Oh, my mom. My brother. They made everything possible. I couldn't have done it without them." Not a word about me. Not a syllable acknowledging the person who designed the entire aesthetic she was now taking credit for. The host said, "Well, it certainly looked like a family dream." Valora's eyes sparkled. "It was. We're such a close family. Always have been. Close family." I muted the TV. The static flickered faintly, her face frozen mid-laugh. The kind of smile that photographs beautifully and rots everything around it. Messages began to appear on my phone. "Did you see Valora on TV? Your sister-in-law's wedding looks like something out of a magazine. She's such a sweetheart." I stared at the screen until the words stopped meaning anything. If you're going to erase me, at least do it in private. Not in high definition. That night, the house buzzed with the faint hum of the refrigerator. Callum was in the den, pretending to read, pretending not to notice how I hadn't spoken all evening. The wedding box still sat by the door, unopened since morning. I carried it into the car without saying a word. The desert air was cooling, the sky deepened into indigo. Streetlights blinked awake one by one. My hands shook slightly on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the strange calm that comes right before something irreversible. The Danes' house loomed ahead, exactly as it had when I first arrived years ago, lights warm, windows spotless, the illusion of peace. I parked by the curb. For a moment, I just sat there, watching the silhouettes move through the curtains. Laughter drifted faintly through the open windows. I walked to the door and rang the bell. Callum answered, confusion flickering across his face. "Adelise? What are you doing here?" I lifted the box. "Returning something that isn't mine." He hesitated. "You didn't have to." Behind him, Valora appeared at the end of the hallway, barefoot, holding a glass of champagne. "Oh," she said, the word coated in sugar. "You got it." I nodded. "I did." She glanced at her brother, then at the box. "Well, Mom said you might like a keepsake." My laugh came out brittle. "Keepsake? Of what?" "My own replacement." Isolde's voice floated from the kitchen. "Oh, don't start, Adelise. It's just a dress. You're overreacting." I stepped inside before Callum could stop me. The familiar smell of polished wood and vanilla candles hit me like déjà vu. "You always say that," I said, meeting Isolde's eyes. "Every time a woman in this family stands up for herself, she's overreacting. Every time you cross a line, it's just a misunderstanding." Isolde pursed her lips. "You're making a scene. I learned from the best." Valora shifted uneasily. "Maybe we should all calm down." I held the box out to her. "This doesn't belong to me." And it never did. She didn't move. For a moment, her smile cracked, revealing something raw beneath the gloss. Callum cleared his throat. "Adelise, maybe we can talk about this privately." "No," I said, my voice steady. "You had plenty of private conversations about me. It's my turn." The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. I placed the box gently on the floor. Then I turned to Isolde. "You've spent years reducing women to fabric, trimming them to fit your version of family. But I'm not something you can tailor." Her mouth opened, then closed. The faint flush of anger spread across her face. I stepped back, inhaling deeply. The air smelled like polished pride and old deceit. Then I walked out. The night outside felt wider than it had in years. I drove without direction, the streetlights passing like small mercies. I ended up at a local donation center downtown, a place I'd once volunteered at before marriage swallowed all my free time. The volunteer behind the counter smiled. "Dropping something off?" "Yes." I placed the box on the table. She reached for the form. "Name for the receipt?" I hesitated. Then I said it quietly, firmly. "Valora Monroe." She wrote it down without question. When I left, the parking lot was empty. The moon hung low, soft against the horizon. I leaned on my car for a long while, listening to the desert wind move through the quiet streets. If they wouldn't let me be part of their family, I'd stop carrying their name. The thought didn't sting. It felt like exhaling after years of holding air too long. I drove home, hands steady on the wheel, the radio low. For once, I didn't replay the fight in my head. I didn't think about what Callum would say when he realized what I'd done. Healing didn't arrive suddenly. It happened softly, step by step. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat there as the night pressed gently against the windows. For the first time, the quiet didn't feel like punishment. It felt like freedom whispering through the cracks. I had said my piece. But they didn't know I meant every word, and I wasn't done. The air outside the Danes' house was heavy, the kind of quiet that hides behind freshly trimmed hedges and polite fences. I told myself I wouldn't come back here again, but promises made in anger rarely survive in daylight. There were still things of mine buried in the attic, books, photos, pieces of a life I had built and they'd quietly dismantled. When Callum's car wasn't in the driveway, I pulled in. The garage door was half open, a sliver of shadow revealing stacks of forgotten boxes. I stepped inside, the smell of dust and oil settling into my lungs. In the corner, a black trash bag leaned against the wall, torn at the top. Something silver glinted from the tear. I bent down and opened it. Inside were old notebooks, a few framed photos, and at the bottom, tangled in lint and wire, my mother's necklace. The one she'd given me before she died, thin gold chain, tiny locket shaped like a heart. It was snapped in two, the clasp twisted, as if someone had stepped on it. For a moment, the world narrowed to a single point. This wasn't a mistake. It was a message. Even your dead don't belong here. I picked up the broken necklace and closed my hand around it until the edge dug into my skin. My mother used to say jewelry remembers the hands that wear it. Maybe this one remembered betrayal too. Slowly, quietly, I placed the rest of my things back into the bag and walked out. By the time I got home, the sun was high and the heat pressed against the windows like judgment. I sat at the dining table, the necklace lying on a white napkin in front of me, the broken pieces glinting under the light. Something inside me was unraveling, but not with noise, more like thread coming loose from an old sweater. I opened my laptop, searching for a distraction, anything that didn't hurt. My cursor hovered over the folder labeled House Finances. I hadn't touched it since before the wedding chaos. Out of habit, I clicked. Dozens of PDFs opened, bank statements, mortgage summaries, loan payments. One name caught my eye, Consolidation Loan Transfer, approved by A.E. Danes. I frowned. I hadn't signed anything like that. I opened the file. The signature at the bottom was mine, or looked like it. The loops, the curve of the A. But it wasn't. I'd never seen this document. My stomach dropped. I checked the metadata, something I'd learned from work. Every digital signature carries an IP address. This one pointed to a Sold's guesthouse router. I sat still for a long minute, the air thick with disbelief. Then I exhaled slowly, softly, and reached for my phone. I didn't cry. I scanned. I downloaded. I compiled. The rhythm of control steadied my pulse. I opened an email and typed 2 words into the subject line, legal inquiry. Then I attached the files and hit send to Marla Kovac, my lawyer, the one who'd handled a minor copyright issue for me years ago. It felt strange reaching out, but there was something clean about it, like breathing after holding your breath too long. By evening, Marla called back. Adelize, I looked through the documents, she said, her tone sharpened by experience. This isn't just messy bookkeeping. This is forgery. Someone used your credentials to access funds. You have a case. Her certainty hit harder than any insult a sold could ever throw. I looked at the broken necklace on the table. My voice was quiet. Then let's start. Marla hesitated. Are you ready for that kind of fight? Yes, I said. Because I've already been fighting in silence. After we hung up, I turned the locket over in my hand. The hinge was still intact. Inside, there was a photo, faded, nearly colorless, of my mother when she was young. Her smile was patient, like she'd already forgiven me for waiting this long. This wasn't just about exclusion anymore. It wasn't about a wedding or appearances. It was about theft, of money, of memory, of my name. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The sky outside was pale, streaked with pink. I dressed in something simple, black trousers, a cream blouse, no jewelry. The necklace lay on my dresser, repaired with a small knot where the chain had broken. I wore it anyway. Some wounds deserved to be visible. I drove to Callum's office downtown. It was the first time I'd ever been there, a modern building with mirrored windows that reflected everything but truth. When I walked in, the receptionist smiled politely. Do you have an appointment? I don't, I said, voice steady. But he'll see me. She hesitated, then called upstairs. A few minutes later, Callum appeared in the doorway, surprise flickering into irritation. Adelize? What's going on? I walked up to him and handed him a manila folder. This is what's going on. He took it, brow furrowed, flipping through the pages. His expression shifted, confusion, then denial, then something closer to fear. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "It doesn't matter. What matters is you stop them now. Or I will, legally, and publicly." He looked up sharply. "You're threatening my family?" I met his eyes. "No. I'm defending myself." He swallowed hard. "Mom didn't mean." "Don't," I interrupted. "You don't get to soften this with excuses." He stared at me like I was someone he didn't recognize, someone who'd stepped out of a story he no longer controlled. "You've changed," he said finally. "Good," I replied. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. "You'll ruin us, Adelize." I paused at the door, my hand on the handle. "No, Callum. You already did that. I'm just writing down the truth." Outside, the air felt cooler, cleaner. I walked to my car, every step grounding me. The reflection of the building shimmered on the glass, tall and indifferent, like the kind of place where stories like mine happened quietly every day. When I got home, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The necklace glinted faintly against my collarbone. For the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. I thought about all the years I'd tried to earn a seat at a table that was never mine. All the times I'd mistaken silence for peace. Healing doesn't always arrive with forgiveness. Sometimes it shows up as evidence. I gave them one chance. But I already knew they wouldn't take it. Days passed without a sound from them. No apology. No call. Just silence thick enough to hear my own pulse inside it. I waited, not because I hoped for an explanation, but because waiting had become a habit I hadn't yet unlearned. On the third morning, my phone buzzed, a message from Callum. It was short, sharp, cowardly. "We need space to figure this out. Don't make it uglier than it is." Ugly. That was his word for my refusal to keep pretending. I stared at it for a long time, then forwarded the message to Marla with a single note, "Proceed." Within hours she replied, "Understood." That was the beginning. The next day, while I was watering the small cactus by the window, a knock came at the door. A uniformed court officer stood outside, polite but distant. "Mrs. Monroe?" he asked. "You've authorized a filing?" "Yes." My voice didn't shake. He handed me copies of the paperwork, petitions for fraud, asset recovery, and an emergency financial freeze. I signed where he pointed. It was clinical, almost anticlimactic. No fireworks. Just ink drying on justice. When he left, I exhaled slowly. The war had begun, not with screaming but with paper. Marla filed the documents that afternoon. I didn't expect to hear about it so soon, but the world has a way of exposing secrets at inconvenient times. 2 days later, the news reached me in the strangest way. Valora was hosting another event, some post-wedding brunch for her influencer friends, a showcase of gratitude and pastel mimosas. A court officer arrived mid-toast, handing the envelope to Isolde in front of everyone. Someone filmed it. Of course they did. The clip landed online that same evening. I watched it once. Valora's perfect smile faltered, her champagne glass trembling as the officer spoke quietly. Isolde's face hardened, a porcelain mask cracking under the weight of consequence. The caption under the video read, "When Karma RSVPs." I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Let them be embarrassed. I'd swallowed enough shame for all of us. The next morning, an official envelope arrived for me, standard mail, dull brown. Inside was a notice from the DMV. A vehicle title transfer confirmation. My car. The one Callum and I had purchased together 2 years ago. I frowned, reading the fine print. Registered owner, Isolde Daines. It had been signed 6 weeks before the wedding. The digital signature carried the same IP address I'd traced before, Isolde's guesthouse router. I laughed quietly, the sound bitter but clean. Flashbacks rushed in, Callum standing in the driveway months ago, handing me a new set of keys. "Don't worry about the paperwork," he'd said. "I'll handle the car stuff. Just focus on the flowers." The flowers. The ones for the wedding I wasn't invited to. They played house while stealing mine piece by piece. I forwarded the documents to Marla. She called within the hour. "They've made this easy for us," she said. "Everything's traceable. Digital theft leaves fingerprints, Adelize. You're in the right." Her confidence steadied me. For the first time in years, I felt like someone was on my side, someone who didn't tell me to calm down, to keep peace, to be understanding. The hearing was set for Friday. I spent the days leading up to it in a kind of focused calm. I prepared every document, printed every screenshot, labeled each file with surgical precision. No fury, no crying, just order. Quiet order. The morning of the court date, I woke before dawn. The necklace rested against my collarbone, cool and grounding. I brewed a pot of coffee, stared out the window, and whispered to my reflection, "You asked for peace. They chose war." The courthouse smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. Marla met me in the hallway. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. "I've been ready for years." Inside the courtroom, Callum sat beside his attorney, eyes down, suit pressed, jaw tight. Isolde was there too, dressed like she was attending a charity luncheon. Valora hovered near the door, makeup flawless, but the nervous tapping of her heel gave her away. The judge entered, gavel striking once. The sound echoed through me. Marla presented the evidence first. She spoke clearly, outlining each forged document, each transfer, each withdrawal. Every word was a mirror held up to their deceit. When it was my turn, I stood. My voice didn't tremble. I read aloud from the list I'd prepared, every dollar I'd contributed to the family over 4 years, mortgage payments, utilities, vacations, even Valora's tuition loan I'd quietly paid off when Callum said she was trying her best. I finished with the smallest detail, the one that cut deepest. "Even the floral designs for the wedding were mine," I said softly. "I have the drafts, the timestamps, the receipts." The judge looked over his glasses at the Danes' table. "Is this true?" Callum didn't answer. Valora blinked hard, her lip trembling. Isolde's mouth thinned into silence. The judge tapped his pen. "It appears Mrs. Monroe didn't just support this family emotionally. She supported them financially. Unrecognized, but not undocumented." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Isolde leaned toward her lawyer, whispering fiercely, "This is ridiculous. She's exaggerating." The judge cut her off. "Mrs. Danes, you'll have your chance to speak later. For now, the evidence speaks for itself." The rest of the hearing unfolded in measured exchanges, legal language and signatures, everything tidy, controlled. But underneath it all, I could feel something shifting. The narrative that had trapped me for years was cracking open. When it ended, the judge announced a temporary freeze on joint assets and scheduled a follow-up hearing for full restitution. Outside the courtroom, I walked past them without looking back. Valora called after me, voice trembling. "Adelise, you didn't have to do this." I turned slightly. "Neither did you. But you did." She swallowed, eyes darting to her mother. Isolde stood still, face red with restrained fury. Callum finally spoke, quiet but sharp. "You've turned this into a circus." I smiled, small and tired. "No, Callum." I turned the lights on. I left them standing there, 3 silhouettes against the courthouse wall, all pretending they hadn't lost something bigger than money. Outside, the air felt warm, the sun steady on my face. The war wasn't over, but I was no longer fighting blind. Driving home, I stopped at a light and caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't look like a woman broken by betrayal. I looked like someone who had finally learned her own strength. They wanted a quiet wife. What they got was a woman with receipts. 3 days after the court hearing, I woke to the soft clink of the mailbox outside. The air smelled faintly of rain, the kind that never quite reaches the ground in Arizona. I hadn't expected mail, certainly not from them, but there it was, a thick envelope with my name written in Callum's careful handwriting. For one absurd second, I thought maybe he'd decided to apologize. To explain. I tore it open, heart oddly calm. Inside was my own letter, unopened, the one I'd left at their door last week. Scrawled across the front in black marker, "Return to sender." It landed on the table with a dull sound, like something small dying. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the words. My letter had been short, a simple explanation, not an invitation for reconciliation. I'd written that I didn't want to hate him. That sometimes love becomes silence, and silence becomes survival. But now, it was clear. They'd made their position obvious. They'd chosen silence over truth. I folded the envelope once, then again, until it fit in my palm. Slowly, gently, I slid it into the trash. That afternoon, my phone vibrated with a message from Lila, an old mutual friend who still floated between social circles. "Found an old video of you two. Thought it might make you smile." I almost didn't open it. Curiosity can be cruel, though, it dresses up as closure. The thumbnail showed the backyard of the old house, our backyard. I tapped play. Callum stood by the fire pit, hair slicked back, wearing the same flannel I'd bought him years ago. Isolde was beside him, her posture perfect, a coffee mug in hand. In front of them, a small fire burned. It took me a second to realize what he was holding, the wedding album. My album? He flipped through it once, smiling at something, then tossed the whole thing into the flames. Pages curled immediately, the glossy photos blistering into black. The camera shook slightly as whoever was filming laughed. Callum's voice came clear through the static. "Let's clean the slate," he said, still smiling. Isolde sipped her coffee, watching the photos collapse into ash. "Good riddance," she murmured. The recording ended there, cutting to darkness. My body went cold. It wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was disbelief wrapped in calm. I stared at the screen until the reflection of my face blurred into theirs. The first thing I felt wasn't anger, it was release. Like something final had been decided for me. I stood, walked to the kitchen, and filled a box with the few things still tied to that life. Callum's old shirts I'd never thrown out, the cheap souvenirs from their family trips, the framed certificate from the mortgage refinance, our names side by side. On top, I placed the photograph that used to hang in our hallway, the two of us smiling on the porch, the Laura taking the picture. I'd looked happy then, or at least hopeful. I sealed the box with packing tape, wrote yours in black marker, and loaded it into my car. At dawn, I drove to the Danes' house. The streets were quiet, the sky a gray watercolor wash. Their porch light was still on when I pulled into the driveway. I didn't ring the bell. I just set the box down beside the door and walked away. As I reached the end of the walkway, I heard the door open behind me. Isolde's voice, sharp, unmistakable. "Adelise, what is this?" I didn't turn around. "Everything that used to belong to me," I said. "You can decide what to burn next." The door slammed. Driving back felt easy, like the road had finally stretched out for me. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. At Marla's office later that week, I signed another set of papers. She glanced at me over her glasses. "You're sure about this? It's the final step." "Yes." My voice didn't waver. The forms were simple enough: petition for a restraining order, name restoration, closure written in legal language. Each signature felt like a breath released. Marla nodded approvingly. "You've handled this with more grace than most people could." Grace, I thought. Maybe. Or maybe just exhaustion polished into politeness. When the paperwork was done, she handed me the copies. "Once the court finalizes this, you'll officially be Adelise Monroe again." The name settled into me like something both old and new. Later that evening, I sat at my kitchen counter, laptop open. I deleted the last shared folder, photos, documents, everything that tied my name to theirs. When the progress bar reached 100%, I closed the computer and leaned back in my chair. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. I changed my emergency contact to my sister, Leora. She'd stayed quietly supportive throughout all of this, never asking for details, just sending small texts like, "You're doing fine. Don't let them take your calm." That night, as I got ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. My hair, my face, the faint lines near my mouth. I looked older, maybe, but also solid. Present. I picked up my repaired necklace from the dresser. The chain glinted faintly in the lamplight. My mother's locket, once broken, now whole again. It reminded me that some things could survive the fire. Before turning off the light, I whispered to the quiet room, this wasn't divorce. This was extraction from a system that fed on silence. I lay down and closed my eyes. The image of burning photographs still lingered behind my lids, the smoke twisting upward, carrying every false promise with it. But for the first time, I didn't feel consumed. I felt clean. They'd set fire to my past. I'd set light to everything they buried. The morning of the final hearing was gray, the kind of gray that doesn't storm, it lingers, quiet and heavy, pressing on the skin like a memory you never invited. I dressed in silence. Black slacks. Black top. No jewelry this time. I didn't want shine. I wanted presence. Marla met me outside the courthouse. She handed me a folder without needing to speak. I had memorized every document inside, but I held it like armor anyway. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't falter. Inside the courtroom, the chairs felt too small, the lights too bright. The air held that sterile chill I remembered from hospitals and funeral homes, places where truth always waited to be told. The judge looked over the room, then down at the file in front of him. He didn't rush. His voice was low yet firm, without warmth or disdain. "This is not just a separation of people," he said. "This is the separation of truth from narrative." I stood, my folder held close. Each step to the front felt quiet but final. "I'd like to submit a list," I said. The clerk took it. The judge opened the envelope. The top page read, "Assets built by silence." Every line detailed what I had contributed, financially, emotionally, structurally. Mortgage payments, tuition loans, design work, food, time, years. At the very top of the document, one word was stamped and read, "Void." "I'm not here for reimbursement," I said. "I'm here to make this real. To say, out loud, that none of this was free. That what was built came at a cost, even if the receipts were never acknowledged." My voice was calm. There was no tremor. Because this wasn't rage. This was removal. Precise, steady removal of anything that ever made me believe I owed them my silence. I didn't disappear, I continued. I was erased. Piece by piece. Gently, and with smiles. Valora sat 3 rows back. She didn't look at me. Her hands were folded, perfectly still, nails painted in a soft pink that matched her blazer. Isolde sat next to her, lips drawn, eyes sharp. Callum didn't speak. He hadn't since the last hearing. His lawyer had advised him to stay quiet. I imagine it wasn't hard. He'd trained for it. The judge reviewed the documents. A pause, then a slow nod. "It's apparent Mrs. Monroe's role in this family extended far beyond what has been acknowledged," he said. "Unrecognized, but not undocumented." The words sank in, not like a victory, but like release. After court, the hallway filled with echoing steps. Voices low. People passing. I stayed near the exit, waiting for Marla to return with the last set of signatures. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. I opened the message. "You always told the truth. I'm sorry for letting them bury you. V." It vanished 30 seconds later. One of those disappearing texts. No call. No name. Regret means nothing after the votes counted. But maybe it still counts for something. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked outside into the fading light and drove to the property I hadn't stepped foot on in over 6 months. The house. Still in both names, for now. I unlocked the mailbox. Slipped in one last envelope. The list I'd submitted in court, stamped void again. No note. No explanation. Just a record for whoever still pretended none of this happened. Then I drove away. Quietly. Slowly. Gently. There was no music. No monologue. Just tires on pavement, and the soft hum of freedom creeping back into my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't pray for closure. I just left. Some exits don't need a door to slam. Some stories don't end with applause. Justice isn't loud. Sometimes, it walks out the back door, and doesn't turn around. Weeks slipped into months, quietly, as if they too had chosen not to look back. I didn't mark the time by hearings or filings anymore. There were no court dates to prepare for, no inbox full of documentation requests. Just ordinary days stacked like folded laundry, neat, unremarkable, mine. I moved into a smaller house nestled near the edges of the Sonoran foothills. The view was humble, but vast, where light spilled over the sand like a hush. It had 1 bedroom, pale tile floors, and a front porch that creaked when the wind leaned against it. I taught yoga twice a week at the community center and spent afternoons volunteering at the Women's Resource Clinic. Nothing grand, nothing broadcast. Peace wasn't what I thought it would be. It wasn't a trumpet or a parade. It was the sound of water boiling for tea. The absence of needing to check my phone. The rhythm of my own breathing returning to me. Sometimes I sat on the back step in the early mornings, watching the sky pale slowly into color. In those moments, I didn't think about the Dane's name. I didn't think about Valora or Isolde or even Callum. Then one Thursday, my volunteer supervisor at the clinic asked if I could fill in on a weekend visit to a nearby care facility. A simple drop-in shift. Just company and check-ins. I said yes without hesitation. It was a quiet building with clean linoleum floors and soft jazz always playing too far in the background. Most of the room smelled faintly of lotion and old paper. The third door on the left. I knocked, then stepped inside. She was there. Isolde. Thinner than I remembered. Her hair, once always perfectly curled and lacquered, now loose, soft around her face. She sat in a chair by the window, staring outside, her hands fidgeting with a corner of the blanket draped over her lap. For a moment, my body froze, not from fear, not even resentment. Just recognition. She didn't see me. I moved slowly into the room, adjusting the blanket that had slipped. Her skin was cool, her bones delicate under the fabric. She blinked, then looked at me. But there was no flicker of familiarity. No sting of recognition. After all the war she waged to erase me, now she didn't remember. I didn't say my name. I didn't ask if she did. Instead, I reached into my bag and took out a handkerchief I hadn't planned to carry that day. It had a small M embroidered in the corner, my mother's initial. The thread had started to fade, but the stitching held. I folded it carefully and placed it on the table beside her. There were no words. No vengeance. No forced reconciliation. Some endings don't need punctuation. I stood for a moment longer, then turned and walked out. As I stepped into the hallway, the scent of lilies caught me off guard. They always reminded me of funeral homes and old church dresses, but this time, they just smelled like the end of a story. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean. Later that day, I parked at the overlook behind my new house. The desert below shimmered under the late light, cactus shadows stretching like secrets across the sand. My phone buzzed. A message from Marla. It's done. The trust fund has launched. First scholarship recipient starts next semester. I smiled. The fund had been a quiet idea, born in the stillness of rebuilding. It was for women starting over, those who had been erased but refused to stay gone. The air was warm on my skin, the wind gentle. Somewhere nearby, a quail called to its mate. I didn't reply to Marla right away. I just sat, letting the weight of everything soften into something bearable. I didn't win a war. I reclaimed my life. And sometimes, the softest revenge is silence that no longer hurts. Sometimes, survival isn't loud. It's quiet, steady, and deeply personal. If you've ever been erased by the people who claimed to love you, what did you do with your silence? Did you carry it like shame or did you turn it into power? Let me know in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe for more. Because the next chapter might just be yours.